Thank you for joining us on the Look Up Mindset podcast, where real stories of resilience, transformation, and adventure come to life. I'm your host, author, and storyteller, Heidi Siefkas. Each episode, we dive into the journeys of sheroes, heroes, and badasses who faced life's toughest moments and chose to rise. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's be inspired together. Welcome to the Look Up Mindset podcast. I'm your host, author, Heidi Siefkas. In the previous episodes, I explained my backstory, shared my TEDx talk, and most importantly, why I created the Look Up mantra, wrote the anthology, Look Up Global Stories of Resilience, and now started this podcast. At its very essence, I had a full-blown life catastrophe in my early 30s, a forced life restart, and in this life 2.0, this next chapter of my life, I wanted to carry with it the lesson of that time, which was I couldn't control a tree, I couldn't control my husband, I couldn't control my employer. But when all that crumbled down, when I lost my breath, I was spiraling, the only thing I could do was be in the moment and eventually flip the switch to find the upside in the situation. In the previous episodes, I alluded to that life throws us all curveballs. The one commonality is that we all will struggle. What differentiates us is how we go on, react to those situations, and respond to those unfavorable circumstances. And sometimes life serves us curveballs more than once. And this episode is going to be me sharing with you my most recent forced life restart. When I embarked on my life 2.0, I had regained my full health. I had decided to divorce my husband, and I decided that my career was going to concentrate more on how I'm a wordsmith and a storyteller at heart. And I found love again. But I didn't find love from a dating app. But it was an online shopping experience for a 50% off helicopter flight lesson and scenic flight of South Florida. You guys may remember Groupon. Well, my friend and I both purchased 50% off flight lesson and scenic flight for our birthdays. And we took this said flight out of North Perry Airport outside of Fort Lauderdale in December of 2010. Who greeted us to be our flight instructor? None other than curly, blonde-haired, blue-eyed pilot from Minnesota named Brian Treptow. Not only was he my flight instructor, but he became my life partner and love of my life. We lived in South Florida together. We kayaked and hiked countless miles. We moved to Alaska and Hawaii. We created a perfect life together where he became not only a helicopter pilot, but a fixed-wing pilot, an amphib pilot, you know, those planes that fly and then land in the water, as well as regional commercial pilot, and lastly, a medevac pilot in Hawaii. I, on the other hand, penned 3 books, led international tours, and became a public speaker, doing even the TEDx talk that I shared in episode 2. Our life was seemingly perfect. It was such a different version of perfect than when I was in my 30s. We were both now in our mid to late 40s. At the beginning of 2022 is when I got the idea to create the anthology of look-up stories from all walks of life. And that year, I had about 15 stories completed before the end of the year. At the beginning of December 2022, Brian and I celebrated 12 years of love. Then, that same week, December 15th, 2022, I awoke. It was a Friday morning, and Brian was on call the night before. He was not home yet, but I saw that I had missed 2 phone calls, both from Alaska, in the middle of the night. I went into the spare bedroom, which is where Brian would typically crash out if he was flying at night and came back home before his shift was over. But he wasn't there. I looked at my phone again and saw that there were 2 voicemails. Those voicemails were from Brian's employer, a medevac company that covered the state of Hawaii. They were from 2 different executives asking me to return their phone call. It was somewhere in between 5 o'clock and 6 a.m. Hawaii time. The sun was not yet up, and I called that number. A woman answered and told me what no one ever wants to hear or should hear, but that Brian's medevac plane, on a mission to save someone's life, flying from Maui to Big Island, had crashed. There were no patients on board, but Brian as the pilot, a nurse, and a paramedic. At the time, I did not know what to do. I was hopeful that with more information, the Coast Guard and all the other emergency response crews would find Brian and his team in the ocean. I thought, if anyone could survive a plane crash into the Pacific at night, it would be Brian. He was a sailor, scuba diver, surfer. There's a part of me that almost thought he would be riding a dolphin back to shore. In retrospect, I know that denial saved me. A period of weeks passed by where search and rescue came up empty-handed, and it turned into the next phase, now to just recover bodies in the plane. It took almost 5 weeks. My memory may be slipping me a little bit, but it took that long for them to actually find the plane. Then the grand task of getting the plane and bodies from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. It was time until I understood that my life partner had passed. But the complications of it being a plane crash made it sting even more. And believe you me, when I'm sharing this to you, it's already been 3 years, and the investigation by the NTSB has concluded, but there are still some details that are left unsolved. That's the best way that I can explain it. So, not only was my present life, but also the life that Brian and I had planned for together, they were annihilated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't remember to eat. I couldn't sleep. I had my first panic attack. In talks with family, friends, multiple counselors, some gave some wise strategies, but the majority didn't know what to say, or they said exactly the wrong thing. Needless to say, writing of Look Up Global Stories of Resilience stopped, as did my life. In time, I knew that I needed to move off the island of Maui. My father was living with Brian and I needed to find a place where I had some support so that I could continue to care for him. And I needed a new place that wouldn't remind me of the life that had vanished. At the time, I didn't believe Look Up was strong enough to get through Brian's passing. I decided that we would move to Nashville, Tennessee, because we have family friends of nearly 50 years that could help me restart and help me with my father. He was nearly 90 at this point. We restarted in 2023 in Nashville, and with the help of friends, family, mental health therapists, even all the musicians in Nashville. The songs were always sad at first, but it kind of seemed perfect. My life was a sad country song, but I was determined that Nashville was the right place for me to restart. And in time, in 2024, after we had held Brian's memorial service in both Minnesota and Kauai, I restarted the Look Up book project. I was roughly halfway through, and over the next year, I completed the book and searched for stories with more fervor, more gusto. It was at that time that I knew Look Up worked. Brian was the epitome of being in the moment, and he too would have found the upside if the shoe were on the other foot. I'm very grateful for my first life restart with the tree, which inspired the Look Up mantra. And because of that lesson, I am sharing with you that Look Up works even in something as life-altering as losing your spouse. I have not written of Brian's passing and spoken very little about it because it is still so fresh. As I said, it's roughly 3 years ago. And I feel that at some time I will write about it, but I'm not ready yet. I wanted you to know about this second life restart of mine because it is another reason why this podcast exists. Sharing true stories of overcoming obstacles and thriving in spite of them is lending hope to others that need it. I thank you for listening to my story. Please share this episode with someone who may need a boost, and our next episode will feature one of the inspirational contributors to the Look Up book, and I conclude with, here's to looking up, always. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Look Up Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If the story inspired you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a boost. And remember, Look Up is always at your fingertips, whenever and wherever you need it. Until next time, here's to looking up.